days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam, man. I'm known on this level of the tower as, Jaime and Fuego, yeah. And if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King, that guy, man, yeah. Seriously, he's pretty badass, and like to get all toasty and read him sometimes. Okay, I'm done stereotyping, y'all. What is up? Fuego here, and welcome to the horror show. And I'm doing something a little bit special about my dude Sai King today, in the sheer fact that it is 420. Yeah, 420 is a national holiday, well, international holiday, I think, in a lot of ways, for the pro-cannabis culture, you know, which I'm definitely pro-cannabis culture, but I'm not like super immersed in it like I used to be, and you know, there's a lot of stereotypes and burnout stuff, and I still love Half-Baked and Dazed and Confused and, you know, films like that. But yeah, it was part of my adolescence, man, and you know, I am definitely not going to condone or I'm not going to condemn, but I'm not gonna, you know, hey man, you know, do whatever you want with your life, and, you know, don't incriminate yourself. But I've definitely done my fair share of the mind-expanding things in my day. And, you know, certain tales by Sai King, I feel like they could be enhanced with, you know, just a little seasoning to that degree. And, you know, that's the thing, like, I don't necessarily think, like, for trippy tales, which is what this whole little discussion is going to be about today. King's trippiest tales, in my opinion, okay? And a super trippy story isn't going to be something, it's definitely not going to be the dramatic, world-grounded King stuff that doesn't have scares in it, but yet it's also not going to be like the super scary, balls-to-the-wall stuff like a Salem's Lot, or even, in my opinion, a ghost story like The Shining, or, you know, even something like The Stand, you know, where it's, you know, post-apocalyptic, the whole world has been ravaged. Those stories, I don't find those stories particularly, like, tripped out, man, or anything of that nature, but there's quite a few that I do, and if you're into this idea, stick around. If not, if you think I'm, like, talking some smack about certain, you know, sects of people, which I am totally not, man. I mean, King has definitely been much more of he has condemned drinking far more than, you know, he ever has, you know, something like smoking some reef, man, you know. And I definitely feel like pharmaceuticals in this day and age, and hard drugs, obviously, you know, like, you know, don't even get it. Like, basically, if you've seen this, if you have checked out Pulp Fiction, yeah, or seen a movie like Train Spotting or Less Than Zero, that's the type of shizzle that destroys lives. I really don't see it. And I feel like that's why, as a culture, so many states are legalizing marijuana. And I personally, hey, the worst thing that does in a lot of ways is, like, kind of kills just desire and ambition a little bit, and you get a little too lethargic, dependent with certain strains and stuff like that. And, you know, it has to be like the Tally mentality in a lot of ways. I'll get high to reward myself! You know, get your obligations done, and then relax, you know, and, you know, watch a tripped out movie, or in this case, read a tripped out book. So, a tripped out tale. So this is me just giving some thoughts on, in my estimation, King's trippiest tales. And yes, that was all personal opinion about just cannabis culture, drugs in general, and so on and so forth, you know. The thing is, he hasn't really done a ton of stories that I would particularly say were super trippy, but I mean, there's definitely stuff like the Sci-Fi shizzle. You know, I would definitely point out to Beach World about, like, the sentient sand, and you know, the jaunt about, you know, don't you dare open your eyes as you're going through, you know, this crazy transportation, this portal, you know, being sent across time, or against, you know, then just quick space travel and stuff. It's almost like that episode of Star Trek that I loved so much, where I think it was Barclay, you know, you're not supposed to open your eyes when you're, you know, being teleported, and he did, and he saw the weird monster, and then it kept, like, appearing to him over and over and over. It's not exactly like that type of story, but you're definitely the jaunt is cool. It's in Skeleton Crew, but my favorites of the trippy sci-fi tales is I Am the Doorway from Night Shift. I've talked about it quite a bit. It's about the guy who is orbiting Venus, and like it's definitely more of the trippy sci-fi horror side of things. You know, it's more Event Horizon than 2001, but nonetheless, I mean, both of those are trippy sci-fi with some thriller kind of aspects to them, and you know, yeah. 2001, man. And you ever watch 2001: A Space Odyssey? You ever watch 2001 man? Anyway, other stuff that I find, you know, kind of on the tripped out side is some of the Lovecraft shorts, man. I mean, Mrs. Todd's Shortcut is one, not scary at all, but just trippy and strange. And that's the thing. I feel like when King stuff is more just, you're not as unsettled necessarily, but you're just like, wow, that was weird. You know, love Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. Crouch End borders more so on the horror side of things, you know, of his sort of stuff. But yeah, I do feel like there's a tripped out aspect to any of the dimensional jumping type themes that King has, you know, slowly integrated more and more into his storytelling over the years. Crouch End it's got some scares to it though, and it's interestingly framed with, you know, the two guys at Scotland Yard talking about it. That's a damn good story. That's one of my favorite short stories ever. As is 10 O'Clock People. That's another really tripped out one, because it's like, okay, if you're not full blown still smoking, you know, cigarettes in this case, and man, something cool I found for like $3 at the thrift store the other day. This is dope, dude. See how it's kind of made into like a cigarette pack, and even like open it up and whatnot. It's cassette tapes in there. I'm trying to remember if they actually did a CD version of this or not, but I think the CD version would be more abnormally shaped, and the fact that this is shaped just like a Marlboro box. Like, and the tales that he has on here are Lunch at the Gotham Cafe, 1408, which makes the most sense. You know, a smoker's a smoker when the chips are down, and In the Death Room. Yeah. Yeah, these are good tales, man, and King reads them all himself. They were all later released on the Everything's Eventual audiobook, if I'm not mistaken. So if you purchase the audiobook on Audible or something, or listen to it on Scribd, yeah, King is the one who still reads those tales, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it's the one vice that he has said he has never been able to fully quit. And he says that in the Hearts in Suspension, as I mentioned during that video. He's like, yeah, I just limit myself to 1 or 2 a day. So interesting, right? But the 10 O'Clock People is about those who are trying to quit smoking, and they still have like those moderate levels of nicotine in their system. And it's like they live, and they start seeing people for what they really are, and they're these weird like vampire creatures. It's a trip, dude. And then another one that I find super trippy is from Nightmares and Dreamscapes, if I remember. You know, they got a hell of a band, and it's about this couple, and they end up in this weird small town that is populated with all these dead rock stars, man. And there's like Joplin and Hendrix and Morrison, and just to name 3 of many that are there. And it's yeah, that's a pretty trippy tale. I definitely dig the hell out of that one. And then, you know, there's the weird, just spacey, strange, sad ones, you know, that you get a lot of in Just After Sunset. Willa is one, which is it's a ghost story, but it's not your typical ghost story. It's just got that strange, surreal trippiness to it. I talk about that one a lot. It's romantic as fuck, too. Damn, I love it. And then Harvey's Dream and New York Times at bargain rates. Those are other ones from Just After Sunset that have that trippy, dreamy quality to them that I think could be enhanced with mind-altering things to some degree. Or, you know, if you were drinking, you know, since drinking is a definite depressant, you know, whereas cannabis is a mild psychedelic and whatnot, but also a depressant to a degree, I know. Yeah, you could get really sad reading some of those. And then N is just a mind fudgical. That's more like if you like psychedelics or something, man, like full on, like Rumors or something crazy. That would be nuts. As it would be with a few entries from Bizarre Bad Dreams that I really dig, like Afterlife and which is more, it's connected to the tower, and it's alternate, and then like getting a Kindle from an alternate dimension, and it's pink, and it can, you know, you can read news stories from any different publication in any alternate dimension, any level of the tower. It's not a horror story, but it's it's a trip, man. It really is. Obits is another one, and then that's about this guy. It's very like reverse early edition, you know, and he can, like, if he writes an obituary about somebody, like they die in the manner in which he describes, and so that's more on the horror side, as is the Little Green God of Agony, which is another one that's just trippy in the fact that, and it's also scary too. They did a comic on King's website about that one, and it's about this guy who's in this horrible, I believe it was a plane accident, if I recall correctly, and he was like the only person to survive, and his rehab has gone terribly because he says there's this crazy little green god-like creature or whatever thing inside of him that's hindering his body from recovering. So it's yeah, those are some personal favorites. And then, you know, moving on from short stories to his novellas, I guess The Mist has some trippy aspects to it, but that's more like bunker drama and then horror with creatures. But some may argue that that's, you know, it's trippy because they opened up this portal and creatures came in, you know. But everything else from his novellas, you know, from Full Dark No Stars and from, you know, 4 Past Midnight and different seasons and whatnot, I mean, honestly, the only one, they're mostly dramas, and they're mostly very grounded tales, or like The Sundog and, you know, The Library Policeman, and those full-on horror, and then Secret Window, you know, that's a drama, and, boy, what else? Apt Pupil, super drama, dark as hell, but definitely not the, you know, the trippy, or, I mean, they're just not those. They're either just like thrillers, or they're heartwarming dramas, like The Body, and, you know, Rita Hayworth and stuff. Those aren't trippy stories, obviously. But the one from all the novella collections, from that trio, that I will say has that dark fantasy tripped out aspect to it. Boy, one of the viewers were, a couple of the people in the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group were talking about it the other day, because I wish I could remember who said that they were reading 4 Past Midnight. Maybe it was Adriana Beretta, or maybe it was Bethel, or Chris Bethel. God damn it, I can't remember. But long story short, one of them mentioned that they were reading The Langoliers, and it's definitely an emotional story, but it's a trippy premise. It's like, okay, you get on the red eye going from Los Angeles to Boston, and obviously most people sleep on the red eye, and it's like, okay, you wake up and you're in Boston, but is it an alternate dimension Boston? Because the trippy twist is that nobody else is there aside from those few people on the plane that were sleeping when it's a trippy story, and it's got some emotional weight, and yeah, lightly toasted or whatever. I think you could get some, well, not more out of it, but just a different perspective, man. And so that's really just my thoughts on his trippiest novella, single novella, because it's really the only one that I feel like constitutes it, and then short stories here on 420. But this is where a lot of people are going to disagree with me, because I whittled it down to 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, I whittled it down to 10 selections from his novels that I felt to be the trippiest with their concept, or with the execution of certain story points and beats and stuff like that. Honorable mention, I gotta say, is Rose Madder, which I am still anxiously awaiting an adaptation for. I mean, it's about an abused woman on the run from her crazy policeman husband, and she buys a painting as she's on her way to this, you know, like, you know, woman's home for, you know, recovery from abuse of this nature, and it turns into a portal to like Midworld, basically, which, you know, obviously we will get to the Dark Tower stuff. But, you know, one of the first ones, ironically, that came to mind as far as just trippy setup, at least, you know, some may argue that, okay, having telekinetic powers, or, you know, second sight or whatever, stuff like Carrie or the Dead Zone, okay, I'll admit, honorable mention wise, that's kind of trippy, you know, being able to just sense those things, you know, just see the future, levitate things, whatever. Yeah, those are more like a melding of some aspects of science, the science side of science fiction, you know, and, or, you know, well, I guess more so on the fictitious side too, because can't people really do this sort of stuff? But the one that really stuck out for me, especially with, you know, the drug connection to it, because, you know, Carrie, that's not really why, and it's definitely not with Johnny Smith. He gets whacked in the head and, you know, almost dies in a car accident, and that's where his powers presumably come from. But Firestarter. The setup of Firestarter for me, because of the sheer fact that Charlie's parents are going through these drug trials of like weird psychedelics and strange pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. And that is drawn as the correlation for why when they have their daughter, she has these pyrokinetic powers. And, you know, then it turns into much more of a drama with science fiction elements. It's never really too scary of a book in my estimation, but like I said, it's where King just... It's one thing for a concept to be otherworldly completely, but I feel like it's trippier when you try to explain it with valid science, because then it feels more actual and likely. And for me, at least, that's what makes my head turn a little bit, and I'm just like, whoa, man, like, damn, there's a possibility there, you know? And that trips me out when it comes down to a story, if it has that essence of plausibility. If it's completely, you know, otherworldly or whatever, I can't particularly get into it. But another one that I have to mention, and this is going to be, I'll just do both of the dairy references next to each other. I'll just continue in published order. You have to go with It, obviously. There's a few tripped out scenes in particular. Obviously, the ritual of Chud or Chud, or I've heard so many people, you know, they have, it's just like, I don't know. You have to, I believe it's Ritual of the Chud, if I'm not mistaken, but it's got those little dotskis on the top. That mental battle of sorts that goes down is a trip. All the stuff with the turtle, you know, is very, very strange. But for me, like, the smokestack scene, which I'm hopeful, so very hopeful, pops up in It Chapter 2, where they basically all go into this fort of sorts that they've made, and they, like, set this fire, and they, like, get all... They're inhaling so much smoke that they pass out. And if I remember correctly, it's Mike and Richie that actually make it the longest and stay in there, and they're the ones that have this tripped out psychedelic vision of the arrival of the Pennywise entity on Earth initially back in prehistoric times. And that shizzle is like, what? What is going on? And so there's a lot of really trippy stuff, in my opinion, in It, and that's... Of all of these on here, that might be the most, like, full-on horror, you know, that just blends the horror with the really trippy stuff. I mean, it's maybe King's best book ever for a reason. It fluctuates in my top 3, as I've all too often said, but we're not trying to give too much attention to anything, and I don't know, y'all may have to have bowls to go pack, or, you know, I don't know, may have to just go get some CBD or whatever it is to, you know, put on your hands for your arthritis. I don't know what sort of afflictions you may have, and nor am I here to judge anything whatsoever. Yeah, just be good to each other, and don't do anything that's too destructive to yourself, because, hey, I know better than anybody about just having to find the temperance about drawing the line, and not always finding it. It's unfortunate. But Insomnia is another one, another dairy story, but another dairy story that just deals with real trippy shizzle. It's a town where... Whereas Castle Rock, I feel like evil just kind of gravitates toward Castle Rock, and it's like more the darkness of the human condition and whatnot. I just feel like there's a trippy, cloudy presence of otherworldly evil that gravitates towards Derry, and that's because of, you know, that evil essence that crash landed there. But it's not really why Ralph Roberts ends up in the condition that he is. He basically is a character who loses his wife at an elderly age and then just can't fall asleep. And we have heard, there's many clinical studies about the fact that you will start to trip out and see shizzle that isn't there if you are an insomniac for long enough, and if you're just not sleeping. In Ralph's case, he starts seeing bald little weird doctors, and he starts seeing, you know, balloons floating that are attached in like a representation of people's life force and stuff like that, and the quality of it as well. There's a lot of super triptastic concepts that are all throughout Insomnia, and I mean, yeah, for that shit, even though it's not an absolute King favorite of mine, I think it's a very creative book in a lot of ways, especially in the way he explores grief in a different fashion than he does in Pet Sematary. It's not black as coal, but also it's just... Pet Sematary is not a trippy book, except for maybe the marching through the swamp and stuff like that. Pet Sematary is just a dark, sad... We've talked enough about it, so that's why it's not on this list. But, you know, another one that I obviously have to mention is, and this may surprise a lot of people because it's a Bachman book, but, and this is a shout out to my dude Rob, I gotta mention The Regulators, because whereas Desperation, its counterpart book, its twinny, if you will, you know, I feel like The Regulators is 100 times trippier if you've already read Desperation, but it's still pretty trippy just in its own right because of the fact that it's like the Midwest, Ohio if I remember correctly, and you have a ton of characters that are in Desperation, some that live in Desperation, and then they're like killed right away in the Regulators. But the concept of what's really going on in the fact that there is this gifted boy who is like manifesting these entity like creature whatever things from his favorite shows, from like the Moto Cops to, you know, like there's like country western, it's slowly turning into a western he's basically changing his suburb into like a western slash like I don't know, some sort of strange you know, show like I don't know, Moto Cops, GoBots, or whatever that you could have seen in the 80s. It's so violent, and it's arresting in its violence. It is a trippy merging, and this is one of King's sober books, mind you, in the 90s. So it's like, it is the most trippy melding of so many different strange ideas, man. And that's why, like I said, the trippiest stuff with King, for me, is where he just, it's just weird. It's such a weird book, but damn is the Regulators cool. It's really cool, in fact. You know, not one of the absolute trippiest. In fact, the next two aren't the absolute trippiest, but they're ones that I have to mention. I love Doohickey in the fact that the concept of Phantom Limb Syndrome, and there's a great Alice in Chains song called Phantom Limb from, trying to remember if it's on the Devil Put Dinosaurs Here. I believe it is, so their second comeback record. But just the idea of Phantom Limb and the science and the psychology behind it and everything, and, you know, our lead losing an appendage and then yet still feeling something there, and then the weird otherworldly ghost-like compulsion. And this is probably where some people would say, dude, The Shining is a super trippy book. I don't know, The Shining is more so about alcoholism and the fragmentation of a family in my estimation, but, you know, and in ghosts, but yeah, anyway, nonetheless, just the idea of, you know, that presence coming in him after losing an appendage, and, you know, just this need to paint and this sudden creativity being reawakened and stuff. Those are all super trippy ideas, and I don't really feel like Doohickey is full-on horror either. It's more of like just ghostly trippiness and whatnot, and y'all have heard me sing the praises of Doohickey enough on here. So if you want to hear all my thoughts on Doohickey, there's the anniversary review that's here in the Stephen King set list and everything, the Stephen King themed playlist we have here on the horror show. But another one that just has more trippy concepts and isn't full-on horror that I really appreciate, Lisey's Story. And Lisey's Story is about this woman whose husband is a very famous author, speaking engagements, fervent, psychotic fan base to some degrees, which comes out in the third act, which is where I think the story becomes its weakest until like the very end and like the epilogue-y type stuff. And in case you didn't know or see the previous episode that I did about this, King is adapting this for the Apple streaming service. But where this gets trippy is in the fact that, you know, she finds out where her husband derives his inspiration from, and it's from like jumping into some strange, serene, like alternate dimension of weirdness. And you see, just if you have the hardcover and you open up and you see the flowers and all the foliage, and it's trippy. And it's a really just sweet, sad, heartfelt book too. So, you know, it's not going to be super tripped out sci-fi like some of these other ones, but I just feel like it's got some strange concepts, and it's more, anytime King does like the dimensional jumping, I feel like there is just merit of strangeness to it. And, you know, Sleeping Beauties, even though I'm not the biggest fan of that book, I had to mention that here because the concept is just weird. It's like, okay, what if all of the women in the world just started falling asleep and then having this, going into this cocoon-like state, you know, with like this webbing of sorts almost like on them, and once they're asleep, they show up in this completely other dimension world place where time passes at a totally different rate, and all the men are left to fend for themselves. That's not a trippy aspect of what the men all do when left to their own devices, you know, and there's all the killing and the craziness. But just that concept and that setup alone, and yet there's one woman who is impervious to it, and Eve is a fascinating character. She's one of the most interesting things in the entire book, honestly, because I just never latched on to the protagonist as much, and it's a vast cast, and I didn't particularly love any of them that much. It was a similar problem I had with Under the Dome, and yet a lot of people disagree with me about both of those books, but I'm not the biggest fan of Under the Dome or Sleeping Beauties, but I will give Sleeping Beauties credit in the fact that it has a trippy concept to it that was apparently Owen, King's son's concept. So I don't know, I've talked to a lot of people that actually dig and they don't mind some of the plotting, pacing and whatnot, and it did hold their interest throughout. I was just announced recently that AMC has ordered to pilot Owen writing a script for the TV adaptation of that. So that would be joining another King kid for Nosferatu and Joe Hill. So what do we have left? You know what we have left. You know what we have left. The Dark Tower series isn't some of the trippiest, weirdest chisel that King has ever put together. If I was going to say The Regulators was a hodgepodge of all these different reachings and weird ideas and just triptastic shit, man, The Gunslinger, it definitely is, with the concepts of a world that moved on that may or may not be ours. It's the palaver that him and the Dark Man have at the very end about like the creation of the universe. That is really, really just mind-blowing craziness, man. And then with book 2, you're jumping into other people's bodies in other dimensions after you're stepping through doorways. That's wacky. I don't really feel like 3 and 4 are as trippy, so I'm not going to give as much mention to that, nor do I necessarily feel like the story with 6 and 7 ends as crazy trippy either. But 5 is... Wolves of the Kala is so strange in so many ways, and yet so brilliant in a lot of ways with the nature of something Jim Hahn has pointed out many times in the Facebook group, and the fact that it's commentary on the aspect of storytelling, and with all the weird... It still doesn't work for me as much with the whole borrowing of the Sneeps and the Dr. Dooms and all this different strangeness, but just jumping to the different eras of New York and everything, those are some real trippy concepts, and it is a callback to the stuff that we already saw in the drawing of the 3 in the second book. Nothing really too triptastic, except for maybe putting yourself in your own story, Sai King, which we get in 6 and in 7. But man, the Dark Tower, it's a mind... Seriously, it really, really is, from the fantasy to the science fiction, to the western, to the horror, to the action, to the drama, to the... It's everything to me, man. It genuinely, genuinely is. And now I'm going to shock all of you. You want to talk about a trippy, strange, crazy crap monster? Yeah, you're going to talk Dreamcatcher. And this is like a back half honorable mention. Get it back half? Because it's all about, yeah. Shit weasels. But from the alien invasion aspect to how just over the top Kurtz's character is, to, I mean, damn, just, I mean, characters getting stuck within their minds after being possessed by things. And the fact that King was hopped up on painkiller drugs the entire time. This is a drugged out book, man, and not drugged out in the same way that Cujo was, I mean, which is why that's not on this list, but yeah, anytime King does sci-fi, I just feel those reverberations of substance within him. And, you know, the ones that I mentioned, like I Am the Doorway and the John Beach World and stuff, those were all written when he was, you know, doing other things. But, you know, I don't want to talk much more about Dreamcatcher, because y'all know my thoughts on Dreamcatcher. Do you think Dreamcatcher's a trippy Stephen King book, though? I don't think anybody can argue about that sentiment. And, you know, the one other thing that I have to mention, and that's just because it was written exclusively for screen, is Creepshow. Because Creepshow, while it's campy and it's silly at times, if somebody was bowled the fudge out, and all of the crazy color schemes and stuff that Ramiro brings in, especially, you know, for like the Father's Day bit, and for the crate, and I mean, it's super psychedelic. It is a psychedelic collaboration between the two of them, especially visually. Maybe not as much in the storytelling, and that is the one thing that I will contend that with, as much as I adore, you know, The Raft, and it's my favorite of all of the Creepshow segments, story-wise, there is just the visual just style of George Romero, and it doesn't transfer over to Creepshow 2. Bottom line, it just doesn't look the same. And for that sheer fact, I feel like the look had a lot to do with that just, boy, wacky, just tone that you got in Creepshow. So that was just one other thing that, like, after I made my list, I was like, I gotta mention Dreamcatcher for how much of a just whacked out, trippy ass story that it is in a lot of ways, even if I don't think it's particularly good. And then also just Creepshow specifically for being written to screen and for just how wacky it is. I just love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. So that's going to be the end of our show for this particular day, which I do this program every Terrifying Tuesday and every Scarific Saturday. We're going to continue doing twice a week. Even though the horror show has shifted to one episode a day, you will get a bonus evening episode every Tuesday and every Saturday. And if we have like a special film review that we need to put out, or if there's a really pertinent trailer, if it's like pertinent content, then yeah, we will put out a second episode. But for the most part, we are shifting gears back, except for Tuesdays and Saturdays when, yes, you can have your weekly worship of El Rey, Sai King, with yours truly here. So I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, where if you just search in Fuegotainment, you will find, yes, my channel where I cover everything that is not spooktacular. I did a very With It trailer reaction to episode 9, and I also I try to do at least 1 or 2 films a week, both new and maybe occasionally something old. But the biggest thing for me is the fact that I'm about to start unleashing more of the Star Wars content, most notably my review of Revenge of the Sith. That is coming up this upcoming week. I've been doing one Star Wars film in the timeline order, so in the canon timeline order every single month, and so I already did episode 1 and 2, and then last month I did the Clone Wars. This month will be Revenge of the Sith. Then I'm going to be segueing into the spin-off films, which is going to be Solo and then Rogue One, and then I'll get into the original trilogy. Then I'm even going to do some Ewok stuff. I mean, make it Christmas special, and then obviously 7 and 8 leading up to December's release of episode 9. Yeah, and maybe even some comics and novels as well. I was just looking at all of those and I was just like, wow, okie dokie. But obviously, you're not here for Star Wars, you're here for Sai King, you're on the horror show, so make sure to like and share and subscribe to this channel if you are just stumbling upon this and you're all toasty on 420 today. And also, I hope that I didn't step on any toes with me just trying to be lighthearted about this discussion today. And also, if you haven't hit the bell, that's how you get notifications about any time we put up new content or new episodes of this go up. And also, before I forget, Hail to Stephen King Facebook group where I'm the sole moderator and admin. We're at about 500, in the Ka-Tet, and it's a pleasure and an honor to interact with all of them, and they really made my 150th episode just a few days ago so very special. So, danke, arigato, merci, muchas grazie. Yeah, I love all you guys. So much of that. And also, book of the month, since we're almost at the end of the month here in April, is Carrie. It's a quick read, even if you're hearing about that here at the very, with only like 10 days left in the month. I mean, I bet you could read a couple 100 pages of Carrie and still take charge and take part in the live discussion that will be going on in the last episode of the month, which, yes, is coming up very soon. So, I guess that's going to call it a day. And I will let all of you go. Gracias once again to everybody who tuned in. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, I say hasta luego, sin amigos. I am hopeful that we get to share palaver sooner rather than later. Say thank you. And until that instance transpires, remember to stay scared, man. Read Stephen King.